All right, welcome back, everyone. This is I Did Not Read Your Book. I didn't read your book. I am your host, Lutch, and today we are not doing a podcast, but in fact, we are doing another edition of IDRYB Live. We are going to be joined by some past IDRYB guests, so you might be familiar with them. We have Blaine Pardo here and Anirudh Garg from our earlier episodes. So, what we're going to be diving into today, if you can't read the title, is just a conversation about what is it that we care about and who do we trust when it comes to news, culture, all that kind of stuff. Where do we get information and that kind of stuff. This is going to be a recurring, ongoing conversation, and so I thought this was a great place to start. We, even though Blaine and I, and definitely Anirudh and I, if you've seen our past live streams, have gotten into some of this stuff, as a specific event, so to speak. I really wanted to put a stamp on the beginning. And so, with that being said, I will go ahead and take the lead. And I just want to say that the top three things that I care about when it comes to politics and culture, number one would be liberty. I think that stretches to individualism and just the ability for the individual to have the pursuit of happiness and the life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. I put that all in one category. The second thing would be well-being. So that can be defined in many different ways, but I see it as the opposite end of the spectrum from pain or suffering. And so there's many different ways to define well-being and what it is and what it's not, and suffering and what it is and what it's not. But if you can have that conversation and figure out what those two things are, then I think the prescription to what to do, what our next steps are pretty easy. And then third, I think prosperity is a value, because even though that kind of seems, I can see people taking that as a materialistic view, but I think that because money makes the world go round, we need to be successful in financially in order to put out into the world whatever it is that we want, whether it's a message or a product or this or that, whatever it is, you need money to do it. And so that's what is important to me. So those are the values that I will be coming from. I guess we can all go through our values, and then we'll all go through the sources, and then we'll get into the bloodbath. So bringing up who you might recognize from the earlier streams and the previous IDRYB Live, we have Anirudh Garg joining us. Anirudh, why don't you let the people know what it is that you care about?
All right. Hi, my name is Anirudh Garg. And for me, I guess the three most important things for me is, I guess, one, the maximization of human liberty. Number two, I would say the improvement of material conditions. And third, I think, would be creating an environment to foster innovation and new ideas.
Cool. Anything you want to expand on there, or is that pretty much the long short of it?
Yeah, that's a long short. We can get into the details later.
Perfect. All right. And Blaine, you are up.
Well, it's interesting. I came at this from the things that were keeping me up at night, rather than the values I push. But I think they tend to fall in the same buckets. To me, it's funny. The first of us all lead with liberty, and to me, I think one of the biggest divides that's hitting our country right now is the belief that the collective overrides personal or individual liberties. And I think that's an area that we see a lot of conflict in. We see it around COVID, we see it around gun control, we see it around a lot of different things. And I think it's something we as a country have to kind of wrap our hands around and try to resolve in some way, shape, or form. The second thing that I think is a topic that keeps me up a little bit is the wokeism and this belief of kind of a digital lynch mob that feels empowered to contact your employers or to try to ruin your life or make threats to you or whatever because they don't agree with where you stand politically. I think it's a real threat to individual liberties, and I think it's a real problem that we as a country are going to have to wrap our hands around at some point here. And the third thing that really kind of resonates with me, and I call it media accountability, and media really applies to big tech as well as the mainstream media. Uh, we have stories that come out all the time that are false, that are leaked from an official, Washington D.C. insider that turns out that it's completely erroneous, things along those lines. And we have media figures that have become uh, commentators, have actually become more of an entertainer than someone who's actually presenting facts. And there's no accountability, there's no checks and balances against that. And I'm not advocating by any stretch censorship, but I also think there's got to be some degree of accountability that when somebody comes out and blatantly lies and goes on the air, they need to lose their jobs. And if that's a tech company blocking a story going out because they don't like it, then somebody needs to lose their job for that as well. So those are the three buckets that I kind of came up with.
Awesome. So that gives a very good starting point in the fact, as you mentioned, we all have liberty in some form as a top tier value or something that we want to preserve. And so, keeping that in mind, just moving along with our introductions, I would say the people who I trust to give me information when it comes to embodying these values and living the kind of life that I want to live. First and foremost would be Tim Pool for me. I think he is. I've been following him for a good 5, 6, 7 years. And when he was still doing on the ground reporting, I remember when he was in Sweden doing the no-go zones, and I've watched his evolution, and his views have changed. And I would say for the most part, I think my views have changed along with him, although of course not all of them. I just think he is, in terms of the way that I view the world, I think he gets it, and it feels pretty much the same way, but articulates it much better than I do. Second would probably be I got a long list here and we can get into more, but if I have to pick the top three, I probably would go with Steven Crowder. I actually just released a clip earlier today that was saying Crowder is for people who already agree with Crowder. But I don't think that changes the validity of his information. And even though he can be a little bit, out there sometimes, I think the information that he brings to light is very good. And then coming out of left field a little bit, not even really a political channel, would be Abba and Preach. These two guys that just they have a reaction channel. And sometimes they'll talk about politics, sometimes they'll talk about culture. And they they talk about things that don't really get thrust into that political space as much. But in my opinion, depending on what they are, can be just as important as the things that make headlines. So those are again, I've got a long list here, we can get into it, but if I had to pick three, those, and I could never listen to anybody again, I think those three would probably send me in the right direction. I think, I'm hesitant not to bring up anybody who is specifically on the left in that list, although I do have some on my longer list. But I do think that Abba and Preach are far enough left in their personal lives that what they talk about, I guess you would say they're based, but they do kind of have this what I would call normie, middle of the road type of thing, type of mentality that is more in line with a liberal mentality that's not a leftist mentality. So that is where I am coming from. So we went to Anirudh first last time. So Blaine, how about you? Who are your favorites?
Well, I want to first clarify my approach to media in general, which
Please.
is I really don't trust anybody anymore.
That's a good.
And so when I see something in the media, my initial instinct is if it's something that's of interest to me, I will try to get to primary evidence or primary data that backs up what they're saying. And that even comes when somebody says, well, here's a quote from so and so. I'm like, okay, I want to read the whole quote. I want to hear the quote within context, etc. And so I go to a splattering of different sources and have to do a lot of digging to get down to what I would call core data. Some of that's because I write a lot of nonfiction, and when you do that, you really want those primary sources rather than the sound bites sometimes that get promoted. So, yeah, some of the websites I'll go look at Daily Caller. They've actually been doing some very good investigative journalism recently, and so is Town Hall. Epic Times is good. Wall Street Journal, fantastic. Their editorial board, I think, is solid. They really attempt to kind of extract out the political aspects and really deal with facts, and I do appreciate that. I'll be the guy that says I do occasionally go to the Washington Post. And I will even turn on like Fox News and then flip over to CNN later in the day to see the same story, to kind of go, okay, is there a middle ground here? What's the perspective of the other side on both sides of this, to determine if I really want to do any more digging. I'm with you. I had Louder with Crowder down. I think some of the stuff he did post-election was pretty much investigative journalism in many respects, which we haven't seen from a lot of comedians. And I too like Tim Pool. I think that he does a really outstanding job. I try to, if I get the information from a podcast, though, I usually try to go out and find that original root data, because I found a lot of podcasters kind of snip things down to justify their own point, and so
Absolutely.
that's how I have to approach it, and I think a lot of Americans are in the same boat. It's like, I don't know where to go to trust anything, so I have to do digging on things that I think are really important.
Definitely. Great points all around. I definitely agree all across the board. Anirudh, what do you have to add to the conversation?
I guess I'd be a little bit of an odd one out because I generally am very distrustful of punditry because unfortunately the incentives to be a pundit is to be entertaining, not necessarily to be factually correct. And unfortunately, being factually correct means you're going to be very boring. So you're not going to be a very good pundit or entertaining. It's why I tend to avoid listening to people if I want the news. I tend to read firsthand. If I were to say individual people whose writing has changed my view of the world, I would say number one is probably Noam Chomsky. I've read a lot of his books. Also read his books on linguistics as well. I would say another one would, and I really, really hate this man, Paul Krugman. Yeah, I've been, as an econ major, I've been forced to read so many of his textbooks, and his writing is painful. But he's pretty analytically spot on, and he's pretty good at supporting his claims. And I unfortunately begrudgingly have to agree with them because a lot of them are very difficult to refute because he does a very good job supporting them. I guess in like the few media entertainment, I listen to a couple of Twitch streamers. Like the primary one would probably be Stephen Bannell. His screen name is Destiny. He got big doing debates. I mean, I respect him just because he's very analytical. He rightfully points out hypocrisies on both on the right and the left, and he has the same political aspirations as me, which is, I guess, breaking the back of the Republican Party and hopefully moving the country in a more like equitable economic direction where we're increasing the material benefits of our citizens and improving the livelihoods of general people. So likewise, I listen to him, though I primarily stick to reading even from like news publications. I'm actually a big fan of the Wall Street Journal. I have a subscription with them. My favorite one is The Economist. They're about center right in the UK, so center left here. I tend to read a lot, and if it's an issue of science, economics, sociology, I tend to look at the scientific literature or the area of study and their literature and their academic consensus. I'm also distrustful of journalists. My high school debate coach, she's a conservative, like gun-loving Texas conservative, but I love her to death because she gave me one important insight, which is when reporters write stories, they're writing it from the perspective of a person with a degree in journalism, not necessarily the field that they're talking about. So it's always important to try to go to the primary source or the person who is more understanding. So likewise, I guess my general thing is I would agree with Blaine, go towards the primary source.
Awesome. Cool. So let's open it up a little bit. I'm going to take that main spot. You bring up a good point in talking about pundits and where you get information. And in terms of us all having liberty as a as a one of our top values, how do you think, either of you, how do you think those the sources that you trust allow you to embody that value and keep that going, or if you're in a conversation, how do you think that helps you?
Would you like to go first, Blaine, or?
No, go ahead.
All right. So generally speaking, like a lot of the people that I listen to would generally have not necessarily the same biases and way of viewing the world, because I do listen to people who have a lot of disagreements with. I look at people with similar goals and intents. So someone like Destiny, he's worked a lot in local politics and trying to move political parties in a certain direction, pushing for ameliorations, whether that be in housing or public health care. I do the same thing. I've been volunteering politically ever since I was 16. First on Lori Birch when she was running in my local district. Then afterwards for Beto O'Rourke's campaign. I volunteered for Senator Sanders' 2020 campaign, and now I'm volunteering for Sandeep Srivastava's campaign here in my home area. He's running for Congress. Generally speaking, I've also voted in every local election I could because unfortunately young people don't vote, and I'll take that as an L for my generation. We're kind of lazy. So I try to get my friends to vote. I do local volunteering and trying to move things forward. And I've worked with a charity here in Dallas where we try to help homeless veterans. We do like a kickboxing promotion, try to help homeless veterans.
Cool.
My entire goal is I want to improve the material condition for people around me. And there are some people who are on the left who have that same goal, people like Destiny. There's some people on the left who don't have that, and they're grifters. One Hassan Piker comes to mind.
Yep.
So generally speaking, my goal is there. I would say that's the people. I'm very distrustful of people like Tim Pool, just because the way that he comes off, it just sounds like a raging lunatic who has no any political gain or any type of skin in the game of trying to change the world. So that's generally my view of pundits like him, and Rachel Maddow as well.
And I mean, putting Tim and Rachel in the same basket is something we can put to the side for later.
The difference is funding. One has more funding than the other.
But again, we'll put that to the side for later. But given that you both are, not that I'm any more trusting, but given that you're both very distrustful of getting information from people speaking to you, how do you feel that reading it from a source is any different than somebody who, regardless of who it is, let's say there is this hypothetical pundit that you would trust, and they're spending all day reading all of these different things and then disseminating information to you. Aside from the obvious fact that their bias is going to be a buffer, if you can understand that bias and see through it, particularly if the person is upfront about it, then why is there a difference? How is that?
Yeah, there's actually a huge difference. This is one of the reasons why watching Fox News is a pointless effort. But I would regularly read the Fox News articles, their online articles, because this is actually came out in court cases too. Like, I'm pretty sure you remember this. CNN had the same issue where in court they registered that we are an entertainment company, not a news company. Punditry, unfortunately, has blurred the lines of being between entertainment and information. So when you have shows like with Tucker Carlson, Rachel Maddow, all those clowns, they focus on being sensational. They're not as beholden to the facts. Whereas if something is written journalism, it's held to a higher standard, even in court. So it's harder to be sued for libel if you, or I guess even slap, if it's a pundit speaking on air versus a person who has something written down and has documentation there. So
Yeah,
there's a liability.
I've seen something very similar because they're public figures, so they're considered entertainment figures, so they can say what they feel and believe, and it's considered them voicing their opinion, and it's considered okay. Uh, and it's interesting too because there's a lot that we have to wade through to get to the truth. Journalism's kind of dead. If you really want an eye-opening experience, pop in a copy on DVD or Blu-ray of All the President's Men. You know, when they went through, and I watch it every so often because it's a great movie, and they talk about we got to have 3 verified sources in order to run the story. And at one point they ran the story, but their sources weren't verified, and they were like, "Look, you guys do this again, you're fired." Like, the integrity of the paper's at stake, things along those lines. And when I went to school, I wrote for the school paper, and yeah, I spent a lot of time with my journalist colleagues, and it was one of those things that I understood what the principles of journalism were, but the pundits do not operate under that umbrella, and they are not journalists. But they like to cloak themselves as such so that they sound authoritative. I don't watch, especially at night. I agree. I'm going to agree with you. I can't watch like Tucker Carlson and stuff for more than 2 or 3 minutes. And even in the morning when I watch Fox News, I'm like, look, all I want are tell me what your top 3 stories are, and then I'm done. I don't want the detail. I'll go find the detail if I think it's pertinent to my life or pertinent to society as a whole, that I understand this. Yeah, it's really hard. And we're a society too where we've elevated talking heads and comedians who are seen as sources of valid information. John Oliver and the hosts of The View and things along those lines, that people turn to them as potential sources. And it's like, if you're getting your news from there, that's not news. That's
So real quick,
something else.
there's something that a through line with what precisely what both of you just said. So between, I think I don't disagree with what you're saying. Again, because I don't, with the branding, I don't read that much. And I do get most of my information, secondhand, third hand, whatever, from somebody. And so if I am talking, or if I am listening to somebody who is a Tucker Carlson or a Rachel Maddow or one of these people, then yes, I think what you're saying applies. However, when Anirudh, you're saying you trust Destiny, and I've ever since I asked you about him, I've been aware of him for a while, but he was on Tim Pool. I don't know if you saw that episode, Anirudh.
I did.
Definitely wasn't a raging lunatic in that episode. But the question is it punditry itself, or is it the pundits themselves? Because I mean,
it's
I guess
inherently punditry. It's inherently punditry.
And but then why even bother with Destiny at all then? And Blaine, why even bother with Tucker at all?
Blaine, would you like to go first, or?
Well, yeah, I can tell you that in the last month I have watched no more than 3 minutes of Tucker Carlson. So, and I consider myself conservative, and I'm not abashed about that. It's fine. I just, it's not where I normally play in terms of how I feel and things along those lines. And I think sometimes it's such a barrage of snippets and one-liners and things that are designed almost as online clickbait type things that it just makes it very difficult. I watched Rachel Maddow during election night because it's always entertaining, just to see how the other side reacts, during things, because I'm like, I want to see that and experience it. So, yeah, is it punditry or the pundits themselves? I'm going to side with our co-host here and kind of go, I think it's the punditry. I think it's the air of this is acceptable behavior and it's being presented as facts when in many cases it's opinion, or it's not even remotely fact. It is stuff that's completely made up in some cases.
Anirudh?
Yeah. So the reason why I like Destiny is, for the most part, because he's very analytical and data driven. If he's making a claim, he's going to give you a list of all the sources that he's researched through. I will go through those same sources. I will come to some disagreements. I don't agree with him 100%. There are many things I would disagree with him, but his methodology for coming to a place is not only intellectually sound, which I would appreciate on a lot of issues that even I myself am very confused on. It also focuses a lot on being analytical and making some ideas accessible. There are a lot of complicated policy ideas that I'm not too sure about myself. So having a perspective, even if it's his, will at least give me something to work with and research deeper.
And
I
so,
see that's the value that it provides me.
and
I,
so,
I tend to agree with you on that. Honestly, I very much feel that you have to go through that experience of doing that, digging into the sources. And as you said, even though you're looking at someone that you do place some value in their opinion because they do the research, there are times you go, okay, I can't back you on this. This
right.
I'm looking at the same data you are, but my conclusions are different. I always kind of phrase it this way. When I was in the 1980s, okay, I'm dating myself here. Okay,
I was born in the 80s.
1970s actually.
Okay, I wasn't born in the 70s.
One of the debate topics, I took debate, which was great, smartest move. By the way, I totally support you in that. Debate was a wonderful thing because it teaches you logic and it teaches you thinking on your feet and it teaches you to pick apart evidence and compare it with counter evidence. The debate subject that year was America should have energy independence because America and the world was going to run out of fossil fuels by the year 1990. There were tons of scientific reports out that supported it. And you can look it up. It was a national debate topic of we have to have energy independence, which meant shifting to nuclear, shifting to solar, looking at alternative fuels, hydrogen fuel cells, all that stuff. All of it was required because science had told us that we were going to be out of fossil fuels. And what I like about what I heard you say is look, we have to pick apart everything and we have to be willing to question even things that are quote science and go, okay, but is there contradictory data out there and how much weight do you place on it versus other weight? And I never look at it as a numbers game. Somebody's always like, oh, there's 100 people that believe this versus 3 people that believe that. And it's like, it's not a numbers game. It's not how many people or who's the loudest voice in the room. It's what's the actual facts. And that's a real challenge.
And what I find interesting is, Anirudh, as you were talking about what you like about Destiny, are there any of those things that you can say that are not true of Steven Crowder?
I mean, I have not watched a lot of Steven Crowder. I'm generally unfamiliar with him.
And so my point in asking is that if you find somebody, if you take the time to find somebody whom you can trust and you are okay with taking in their opinion and analyzing it individually as not seeing them necessarily as a direct authority, but rather somebody who has just spent more time reading about something. And they have this analytical mindset. They can provide you the sources, all of this stuff. Then I'm still not understanding how that is a disadvantage or even any different from the quote unquote the hard source. At the end of the day, it's whether it's on paper or it's coming out of somebody's mouth, it's still somebody speaking.
So I guess simple example is you played the game telephone before, right? The more places something goes through, the more likely it's to be distorted. Likewise with punditry, especially the ones who do a lot of reaction segments, they take like a really flashy news story. They say, "Oh my God," and make like broad conclusions. "Oh my God, society's falling apart because."
But I don't follow those people. I don't think any of us would, and I think I don't think that really needs. I don't think that's really relevant here because I think we all are at the place where I mean, unless you are saying that somebody who follows a lot of different voices, that I am following these voices. Then
I mean, like if you gave the example of Tim Pool. Tim Pool is definitely one of those people.
Okay, how so?
I actually just watched a clip earlier today. I think it was one that came out. He was talking about. He made some ludicrous statements about birth rates, about how our economy is going to collapse because birth rates are leveling off in the developed world. Which
That's not what he said.
Are we referring to the same segment?
I believe so. I can pull it up. And if
sure, it was in the first few minutes. I forgot it was. He had like the headline story about like men.
Well, here's another question. Did you watch the end of the video? Because ironically, I was like, this. Oh, actually, it should be on.
I got through like minute 20 of 26. That's the farthest I could get.
And so originally, leftist men get vasectomies to support women amid fear Roe v. Wade will get overturned. That was the long and short of it. That was the title of it. But the long and short of it was that similar to, and I tweeted about this earlier. I don't know if you saw it. That a lot of people might think that as you're saying, that he's saying some wild thing, when really what it comes down to, what he's actually saying is that, look, if this is what you want, and it was about these leftist guys getting vasectomies to support to support women who are against the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and I don't even understand how you don't see a connection between a rise in vasectomies across the board and lower birth rates.
Well, because generally vasectomies are not responsible for lower birth rates. I've studied developmental economics. Like the biggest determining factor of lowering birth rates is like the reduced infant mortality. One of the reasons why a lot of people have children is because many children don't survive. General female participation in the labor force, the more women that participate in the labor force, the later they get married, the fewer children that they have. Education, more educated women have less children, and the concentration of fewer children allows you to put more resources into children. He erroneously made the claim that lowering birth rates will harm future economic growth, which has been disproven by developmental economists all the way from William Easterly to, I guess, even like Steven Pinker. So he erroneously, like from common sense, I guess this is my big issue with pundits, is a lot of them argue from common sense or intuition, made an erroneous statement about the decline of birth rates, and he pulled up like some hilarious story about vasectomies and like attributed like some sort of mass movement as though this is the reason why our economy is going to fall apart, which is unfortunately like the level of stupidity there is I can't even draw a graph to quantify that.
So I have the video pulled up. Do we want to take a look at it?
I mean, in the first 3 minutes, he ends up digging himself into a hole. But go ahead.
Well, I mean, usually it's the rest of a 25-minute video that would have things to go. So since you came in at the 3-minute mark, let's go to the 3-minute mark. And
I said within the first 3 minutes. I don't know if it's actually at the 3-minute mark. I'm bad at timestamps.
All right. Well, then let's just share here. And all right, so let me know if volume's good.
And you can get a toaster, basically. That taxes maybe an hour and a half, right? Well, when trying to make a toaster from scratch,
I remember this.
Getting your own wiring, getting your own rubber for coating the wiring, all of that stuff couldn't be done. Notably, getting the plastics couldn't be done. So what did the guy do? He mined plastic. He went to a dump and he scooped it up. I'm sorry, that doesn't count. I suppose you could just make a metal duct tees that allow for this to happen. I'm just like, the building house used to be like to the main line. You need home contractor plumbers who can go in and do basic stuff to wire masculinity. We don't have more children. Not or something like that. It's going to require a lot of people. So stories like this aren't just about masculinity. They're not just about men not being able to have families or being unwilling to have families. It's about the future of civilization and what it means if we don't have more children. And obviously, comment below. I don't
Right
got
here.
either.
Go ahead.
So the statement that civilization is going to collapse, or that if we do not have children, we're going to face these issues. Honestly, it has the same parallels to the story that Blaine mentioned about the world running out of fossil fuels by 1990. We made those with models with certain expectations. We didn't expect that we'd be able to mine through fracking. We didn't understand like the use of shale oil gas. We didn't expect massive innovations in our ability to capture energy. So when we made those projections and models, we did so with incomplete information. The statement that he made that if we don't have enough kids, that's a Malthusian principle that's been debunked like decades ago. Ultimately, what increases like having fewer children is actually a benchmark for increasing economic prosperity. Him erroneously claiming that because we're going to have not as much children, our civilization is going to collapse or we're going to be less economic productive, is like, you would have to be almost criminally stupid in economics to make that type of claim.
Okay. So why don't we get to the point of the video before we go any further? Because I mean, I hear what you're saying, but that's, again, not really relevant because you didn't really watch the video. So
I've watched the video. He then goes on to explain about.
I was certainly not getting my balls chopped off. Well, I'm kidding. I'm not getting my balls chopped off. I'm just getting their vasectomies. Well, let's read the story from Yahoo News. They say, after Andy and Aaron Dress had their fourth child, Andy decided it was time for him to step up and help with the family planning. So he did something that the mere thought of makes some men cringe. He got a vasectomy. It was early one morning last winter, a brief moment of peace before juggling getting the kids and ready for online.
I'm looking for the second article. Because usually, again,
as someone who's had a vasectomy, it's a decision that every family at one point or another goes through, which is, do we wish to continue with the current form of birth control that we're using, or do we switch and do that? I did it, and I didn't think about the fate of civilization as the as a driving factor. Not that I want to go into details about my vasectomy.
I think I would also like to be spared those details.
So I mean, again, the point of if that was the whole video, then I would be agreeing with you and saying, oh, because a small group of men are virtue signaling that they're going to get vasectomies when, like that doesn't really do anything, that's going to cause the end of the world. That's kind of alarmist, right? But again, that was 4 minutes into a 25-minute video. So going back to
so my issue is not like him saying something stupid about the world ending because of vasectomies. My statement is him like misunderstanding economics by claiming that our economy is going to collapse if populations shrink, not that vasectomies are causing the end of civilization. That's not the claim. I mean, that's also a stupid claim, but the most important claim is like the stupid economic statement. It's like, I guess it's like the equivalent of someone saying like, oh my God, like government control of industries almost always works. We should do central planning, 5-year plans. It's as stupid as someone saying that.
Okay. I'll disagree. I don't, again, think that well, not disagree, but I think that in the context of the rest of the video, that it makes a lot more sense, and that's not what he was saying.
I don't know what in the video ends up repudiating what he said. His statement alone.
Let's find out. Why not?
Millennial women problem. Nearly 70% of young women are leaning toward Democratic candidates in the midterms. And it's true. Let me show you this. Do you have a favorable or unfavorable opinion of the Democratic Party? And we can see that it's basically 50-50. Ever since, this is really amazing, since the fall of Kabul. I don't get this one, but sure. Hey, Cincinnati don't like it. My favorite 30.
Where is it? It's in that other article. He just had it up.
And eventually, you're a family.
God damn it.
U.S. burning.
The point was.
So it's not.
Whatever. The point was that the other article, the main article he brought up was an article that was talking about the cultural side of it, and the fact that it's not men who are fighting for whatever, I can't find. It's not men who are fighting the pro-life fight. It's other women, and so framing the point of using the article as a little bit of a clickbait and you know what I'm trying to say, sensationalization, that is a part of the YouTube punditry game. I don't deny that. However, again, the question is, do you think that I am aware enough when watching, Tim, and then Destiny, and then Abin Preach, and then Kyle Klinsky, and all these people, that I can't take the perspective that Tim is putting out there, and internalizing the message across all of these different perspectives. That's my question. Is this not? Why is that so much different than reading articles from different people?
All right, because at least 80% of the people you listed are morons. I mean, not in terms of like as people, but as in they don't really understand the depth of which they're talking about things. Like Kyle Klinsky, I mean, I grew up watching him. He was like, I probably like 2014. He was like the big one back when I was in like atheist era, blah blah blah. I read him a lot, but when it comes to a lot of issues on economics, he's just completely illiterate. It's absolutely wild. He made statements that immigration harms economic growth, or like mass immigration or like illegal immigration harms economic growth, something that's been disproven through countless economic studies. They're like crazy things that people will say. Hey, he's anti-free trade, even though free trade has been proven empirically to improve incomes for individuals. It's oftentimes when people have these types of, especially if they're pundits, a lot of them come from emotional understandings of the world, and adding more emotional understandings of the world from different people doesn't necessarily yield clarity, because unfortunately the truth is very boring and it's not very sexy. And unfortunately, that's just something you have to deal with if you care about being right. If you just care about being entertained, then I see no issue with just like listening to anyone you find entertaining. But if the goal is to like have some sort of semblance of the world that you can operate off of and try to do good, then it's a very poor model. Not when your time is better spent understanding on a deeper level the more intricate aspects of these issues.
I would say that you're going to a variety of sources and forming an opinion is still, while it's not as perfect as where you're wanting to go, Anirudh, I think it's better than what most people do, which is they go to one source and that's their view of the world. And that, I think, is a challenge that the country has, is you have to be willing to accept other perspectives and other views of things. And I don't think most Americans are there. I think they're like, look, it's like my dad when he would come home. I'm going to put it on Walter Cronkite on CBS and watch the news every night. And that's where my dad got his complete view of the entire universe, was that in the local paper. And we've got generations of people that's what they do. They go to one or two sources and that's it. That's their whole world. And anybody that challenges that is a heretic or a madman or ignorant or
a white supremacist.
Yeah, well, all that stuff. It doesn't matter.
And to that point, again, especially if you are, you're working, you've got a family. I happen not to, so I have more time to go through different sources, whether they are pundits or they are articles. I do have more time to go through stuff. But regardless, you can only take in a certain number of facts and opinions when you're reading versus when you're listening, especially if you crank it up to 2 times speed. So again, I'm looking for something that personally for me, that I'm thinking, maybe should I not be spending so much time listening to people who I've vetted and have they've predicted things and those things have come true, and they've shown times when they are willing to humble themselves and correct all the things that you would expect a bad pundit to do. They haven't done it. All the things you expect they wouldn't do, these guys have done it, in my opinion. And it's just a matter of timing. If you don't have the time to read to figure out these different, or rather the legitimacy of these different sources, then again, I kind of feel like you're at a standstill. How does one find, if you want to go through this quote unquote boring information, and there is entertaining ways to consume it that are accurate to what the articles you're reading are saying, then again, where's the issue? The issue, what you're talking about, seems to be is if the information does not match, in which case I am not looking to follow that person. I'm not looking to listen to that person. And again, it's even the Kyle Kalinskis and Destinys of the world. I don't agree with a lot of their views, but by talking to them, people who are smart, analytical, in the weeds, all this stuff, they have an understanding of whatever the thing is better than I could get with the time and, frankly, willingness of time that I have to dedicate to learn about any one individual issue.
Well, one of the challenges I think that's out there is what is reality and what is a fact. Because right now, for every fact that's put out there, 3 counterfacts are immediately posted and voiced, etc. That will rely on different data, that will validate in a different way, and it gets very confusing because where do you go for an actual fact, a statement of fact that is irrefutable?
Right.
It's very difficult to go get that data at times. I saw a meme the other day somebody was circulating, and it was like, oh, it was all about the literacy rate in California versus West Virginia. And my first reaction was, I'm going to go to the Department of Labor and validate these numbers because it's in a meme that somebody's circulating, and I'm not even going to click that I like it or whatever until I know that it's actually real. And I don't think most people have the time to do that, nor do they have the willingness to do that.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And again, that's where I think the role of pundits, good pundits, are really important. Because again, whether whether you have the time to you simply don't have the time to become aware enough about all of the things in the world. You can get great information on one topic, or you can be a jack of all trades, master of none. And that's the dichotomy I see if you are, not saying anybody has to do this, but if you're going strictly to, I'm only going to read papers and articles and stuff, or I'm only going to listen to other people talking to me.
All right. I'm going to have a couple of responses to this. The first is, it's true. We live in the information age. We create exabytes of data at any given point. It's impossible to expect a person to be able to sift through all of that and come to an understanding of the world. That is true. In which case, even the few sources that person listens to, you should at least try to put in the effort to make sure that they're valid sources. Unfortunately, pundits, by their very nature, have a incentive to not be valid because good information is not sexy. It's not entertaining. It's not fun. It's very confusing, and it takes a lot of mental effort to do that. People who sensationalize don't necessarily have the incentive to be accurate, which is why, for the most part, if people gain a lot of following for telling something, it's probably an incentive to not trust them. I think you would understand if you look at some products that are marketed very well, but are actually very poorly made. A lot of the money went into the marketing so that you're kind of stuck with a mediocre product. Likewise, it's the same thing with pundits. In the world where we're going to have limited understanding of our information, I think it should be one, look to people who are very responsible in the claims that they make. So if you make a fantastical claim, like, oh my God, we're going to have a civil war, you're going to need a shit ton of evidence, a fantastical amount of evidence to support that claim. If someone throws around hyperbole that easily, then they're not very responsible with their words. If you don't understand a topic, then don't make positive claims on it.
Okay, but real quick. So, talking about sensationalism and the idea of punditry being entertainment, I would argue that is all of the more reason that you are able to read into whatever biases are being displayed. If somebody's talking, then you have facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, all of that kind of stuff. If you're just
they're very good actors.
if they're very good actors, then they're very good actors, and I mean, you've got to but a good actor can't predict the future based on reading the news and seeing what's going to happen and understanding culture well enough to predict what's going to happen. And
I don't know where you see that. Like Tim Pool predicted that all 50 states would go to Trump. That didn't happen. I don't know like what accuracy you're looking from these clowns.
I mean, perfect segue is the Civil War that we are in right now. You are someone who claims that he is crazy for saying this. Meanwhile, a whole swath of the country on both sides of the aisle believe that it is happening right now. And when you are shown examples of it, then you just decide that they don't count, or they're cherry picked, or they're just individual examples. And so the question becomes, if you have your mind made up about something, what good is evidence to the contrary if you're not willing to accept it?
We all live in the realities we are most comfortable with. Okay. And that's part of human nature, to be honest with you, is if that's your comfort area, etc., you're going to accept the data and facts in that particular realm. That's just the nature of being a human being.
For sure. But I mean, again, Blaine, I think in our IDRYB conversation, we had talked about the Civil War, and what are your thoughts on I guess specifically if you're familiar, but more generally if you're not, specifically Tim's claims about what the Civil War is and the fourth and fifth generational warfare, things like that.
I haven't actually gone through Tim's speeches or pontifications on Civil War. My own opinion is there is a conflict being waged right now. If we want to call it a civil war, we can. I think it's a most uncivil war more than anything.
Well, same with the Civil War,
right? It's a war of cultures, and it's a war of ideals, and it's a war of clashes. We have groups of people that are more than willing to try to delist authors, to remove people from having a voice because they don't agree with where they're at politically. Which to me I've never seen in our society up until this point. We've always had sensational journalism. I mean, you look up yellow journalism,
right?
Going back to the Spanish-American War, journalists have always been all over the place. But you're seeing more and more people kind of push it. I've talked to two people, both of which have written books recently, that are both going, secession is actually viable in like New Hampshire, or Texas has actually got a Texit movement that's very active, where they're going, maybe we shouldn't just be part of the United States anymore. Maybe we should go back to being a republic. And they make tons, I'll be honest with you. The data that was presented, very convincing, very solid data, but that doesn't, to me, fundamentally, it's one of those things I struggle with, because I'm like, it's not something I would encourage. It's not something I want to happen. So I feel we're in the days kind of like we were doing with prior to 9/11. There was a war being waged against the United States by fundamental Islamic, crazies against the United States. They were attacking embassies. They tried to bomb the World Trade Center, in the garage, etc. It took 9/11 for us to realize that the war was actually happening, but it had been going on for a long time. And by the way, I'm not saying that's all just one way. There's definitely actions that we took to sponsor some of that activity. I'm not crazy, but I feel like we're in that stage right now. And I heard somebody say, well, what happened at the Capitol was a tipping point. And I said, we haven't hit the tipping point, because nothing changed after what happened in the Capitol. That didn't alter anything. We're not at the tipping point. I don't know where that is, but I kind of feel like there's a conflict that's being waged in the background, and we're seeing it on every level, be it vaccinations, be it, social media, be it how big tech reacts to things. Yeah, there's a conflict that's going on, and it's going to take something to get people to fully realize the full depth and scope of it. That's my take on it.
And that's actually something that Tim talks about all the time in the formation of how a war happens. When we learn about it in school, you learn this event and then that event and then that event and that event, as if everybody was aware of everything else that was going on. And going back to Tim's early days, there was, when he was in, I think it was Sweden, there would be clashes of just small groups, and then you'd go 2 blocks down and there's people sitting in a cafe having no idea what's going on. And so again, if you just hear civil war and you think Tim is saying, oh, there's a civil war because there was some riots that got out of hand, and then some people got into the Capitol, that would be a super extreme statement. However, if you actually look into what he is saying, he's saying that much like the wars of the past, they don't just happen in succession. There's often months and months in between events. And even the events themselves don't necessarily fit into a narrative, so to speak, of this is war, we are at war, until it's over. And as you were just saying with 9/11, it took 9/11 to realize that we had been at war in the Middle East for decades. And not that, or I guess not that we had been at war, but that they were at war specifically with us. It would be more accurate to say.
Okay,
And
I have to step in because I feel like the definition of what a war is completely lost in this conversation. I guess maybe it's just me and my perspective. I don't view like Twitter mobs as like an act of war or some sort of consolidation towards groups of people like trying to topple the government and create some sort of new government or regime. A civil war is a very like specific phenomenon where there are organizations that try to use political violence to capture government resources and to take control of the government, or it's like some sort of secession movement like we had in the American Civil War. Those phenomena just don't exist because it's almost like economically impossible for those phenomena to exist.
As a military historian, I mean, I've written numerous books on military history, and I understand exactly where you're coming from. I try not to parse things down to a solid definition, because what I found is people argue about the definition rather than what's actually happening. And if people feel that there's a conflict going on, then that conflict does exist, whether you want to define it as a civil war or whether we call it something else. There is a conflict within the nation right now. And I think actually it's not just
Right.
the United States. I would say I've seen a lot of evidence in France and other countries in Europe where they're struggling as well internally with much of what's unfolding here. I mean, what I saw last year during the riots, where we saw Antifa going in and burning and looting and corrupting what would be normally peaceful protests and turning it into something else. I see the violence there, and there's not a lot of difference between what I experienced there and what I experienced when the Vietnam protests were going on and some of those got out of hand, or the civil rights some of the more violent civil rights activism that took place.
Did those ever reach the threshold of what you would consider a civil war?
so again, I think this is I think this is
It's a good
precisely his
question.
point.
I don't actually have something that I can throw to that. No.
And I think, but that speaks directly to his point, Anirudh, is that you're getting caught up on the wording, and the fact when you hear Civil War, you think of the American Civil War, brother fighting against brother in the street.
I think of Syria.
Okay, whatever it is that you think of, you are now, the way that language works is colloquially, and when we speak of this conflict, whether you want to call it a war or not is again, up to move is semantics. But the point that you seem to be brushing aside is that there is conflict, and just calling it Twitter
that there's
beef
not
and
there's not like polarization, there's political conflict, there's strife. I don't disagree with that, but to call that a civil war, I just
okay, fine. So let's call it a very
uncivil disagreement. Let's go.
Sure.
It doesn't matter, because I think
how does that make things any better to call it that?
Because I think for one, framing something as like a civil war actively sends the message that this is not something that we can fix, and I think that's counterproductive to any ability to actually fix this. I don't want to this is an issue that we see a lot with conservatives, because one of the like personality traits that defines conservatism is like an increased response to fear of outsiders, fear of immigrants, generally like fear that the country is moving apart, that it's moving beyond you. So inculcating the idea of fear by using a loaded term like civil war, I don't think is doing any good to try to, because if in the world where we want like liberals and conservatives to get along, using hyperbolic language like civil war is not really going to do that. It's not conducive.
Well, but you just did it when you described what you believed a conservative was. I mean, you were like, here's my definition of what conservatives are. You just did the exact thing you said that you didn't want done with civil war. And
the difference is I can back up that statement.
I respect your opinion, but to do the generalizations that you just did about all conservatives, congratulations, you just made my argument. Thank you.
No, I said that there's an association with conservatism and an increased fear response in psychology. Now, this doesn't mean all conservatives are fearful, but more likely if a person's politics is defined by fear, they're going to move more towards the conservative end of the spectrum. I can bring you like hundreds of peer-reviewed papers in psychology about this. This is like a
wonderful, but I think I feel as a conservative, what you just did was label me, apply your definitions to it, which is what you were just arguing we were doing with civil war. You just did with conservatism, and you did it very fluently. I'm not arguing whether you're right or wrong, but I'm saying I don't feel that way, and I've been a conservative for many years. So to me, I feel like, well, wait a minute. You're making generalizations based on psychological papers. I actually talked to real conservatives, and they're not feeling some of the ways that you've described. So I'm dealing with abnormalities only. This focus on trying to come up with definitions, labels, and trying to drill in on those things and focusing on those things actually adds to some of the discourse that's out there, in my opinion.
And furthermore, just taking, I mean, just to, again, this is, I'm not arguing with your whatever the papers you're reading are saying. I'm sure there is, again, talking about framing, and I have a degree in psychology, so I know all too well how surveys and things can be, worded and framed, and all the things we were just talking about that I would say, again, is harder to identify in writing and in text than it is in someone speaking to you. But the point of just having this blanket statement is who, when it comes to conservatives versus liberals, who would you say over the past year in general, who has exhibited a higher level of fear in general?
Fear in general? I mean, I would probably say conservatives. The whole, remember, we're on YouTube, so let's try to not, I don't care about cursing, but let's try to use non-banned words with the sickness. And that's where I'm going with this, is that clearly it's not the Conservative Party that is fearful about this. Yeah, but they are very fearful of government takeovers, of jab mandates.
Okay,
they're very fearful of.
Okay. So let's parse
increased crime.
I said, hold on. So let's parse. Again, breaking it down to semantics, is the fear that you're going to die from something the same thing of the fear of losing a value that you hold dear that is being openly attacked? Is that the same type of fear?
I'm not sure. Fear is a very irrational emotion, so people have like different things. I used to have a phobia of cockroaches. I was more afraid of cockroaches than of heights, even though one could kill me and the other one couldn't.
So I'm asking for your judgment right now in the moment. Even if you haven't thought about it before, you're a smart guy. You can take these two situations and you can say, oh, these are the same or these are not the same. So the fear that you are going to die from a sickness that has a 99.9% survival rate, is that the same type of fear as, oh no, these values that I like are being attacked, and I don't like that?
They're probably not.
I would say fear is fear.
Well, I would say they're very different, but okay.
I mean,
it would be very difficult for me to compare fear because everyone experiences that differently.
Well, right, and that's why that's precisely why your blanket statement that conservatives come from fear may be justified in the way that this study presents it, but in just layman speaking, to suggest that fear is a driver for people to congregate in a certain ideology across the whole nation, I don't really see that as like, okay, yeah, the right's the fearful side and the left is the strong and brave side.
No, the left is not brave. If I were to say what drives
we agree.
What drives the left, unfortunately, I don't know necessarily if this is true of like mainstream liberalism, but a lot of, especially people on the far left, the socialists, the communists, they're driven by a politics of envy. That's generally the negative trait that drives a person's politics. And I think having politics defined by either fear or envy is both very harmful to society. I mean, I don't like the communists. They're very harmful and they're very stupid. But generally speaking,
I'm going to side with you on that one.
Yeah. So generally, it's the issue is for a lot of people when they enter politics, they enter it in very emotionally, and they process a lot of these changes emotionally. It's just for different people, the emotions that they process things is different. I'll go replace this camera battery.
All right.
I'm sorry.
And again, I agree with you, but Blaine, I'm interested because I assumed that you might agree that saying that conservatives are the fearful party, even giving him a chance to explain that's not necessarily what he meant. That's kind of bombastic is a strong word, but it is kind of a pretty bombastic thing to say. That just
I think that there are different fears for different political entities, period, across the board. To say one is more fearful than the other, that's why I said fear is fear, because if you try to figure out who's more afraid, how do you quantify that and measure it? And how do I say that your fear is not as valid as someone else's fear and things along those lines? We could spend all day arguing about that, and then we get back into definitions.
So I just want to make the one clear statement. The statement is not that conservatives are more fearful than liberals. It's that the primary emotions that dominate a conservative's engagement in politics is fear, and the primary emotion that drives engagement in politics for a lot of people on the far left is envy. That doesn't mean that the person is envy.
So how does that play out practically? Because I have not heard this before.
Okay, so for example, people are more motivated. I'm pretty sure you've heard the story about like a record number of people running for conservatives running for school boards, right?
Yeah.
So one of the reasons why that they cite is that they're very worried. They'll say concerned, worried, fearful. They'll use all of the same words of what their children are learning in school, primarily in juxtaposition to CRT. Liberals are not worried about CRT. They would be fearful of certain things, but they're not thinking, "Oh my God, I want to fix." I'm like terrified of these conservatives have power. Their primary engagement in politics is generally I am very outraged that something terrible has happened. Why is there so much suffering in this? Why are these people who are very downtrodden, these oppressed, suffering so much? How do I go about fixing it, or how do I make them feel better? It's a different emotional response for a lot of people.
It's interesting you go down there because one of the things I respected about your resume was that you been involved and engaged in politics. I assume you got involved and engaged in politics to guide direction and to make sure that you had a voice that reflected your ideals in government. Would that be a safe assessment?
Yeah.
So I would say the same thing is true of any parent who decides to get involved with their local school board or their local county politics. It's not out of fear. It's I want to be there and have that same level of engagement you voiced is exactly what I think they're asking for. And so you've taken it and said, well, it's more based on their fear. Well, maybe yours is based on the fear that conservatives will win and they're not going to go down the road to the ideals you hold so dear. So, we can play this game back and forth, and I don't want to make this personal because it's not by any stretch. But you're ascribing an emotional reaction, which is fear, to the people who are running for the school board, because for the first time ever, parents, because kids were working at home and taking their classes from home, got exposure to what they were learning, and they're going, look, I want to have a voice in that. And it's not fear, it's I want to be there and make sure that what's happening is consistent with the values I believe to be true, just like you are when you're supporting candidates that you believe in. And I respect it. I don't necessarily, I don't respect Bernie Sanders at all, but that doesn't mean I don't respect the fact that you respect him. You're an intelligent person, very clearly. You're articulate, which I'm very impressed with, and you're well read. That doesn't mean that my view of Bernie Sanders is any different. And it means that I need to be respectful of your view of Bernie Sanders. And that's okay.
I mean, I would disagree with you. I don't think you need to respect my view of Bernie Sanders. Whether or not you like the same people,
I agree with you,
is
but he will anyway.
irrelevant.
Which and that is a cultural thing that I think is a good metric. You're absolutely right. He has no obligation to respect your choices, your opinions, any of that. But he will anyway, because that's a value that is consistent with a lot. Certainly not all. Certainly not all. There's assholes all over. We don't have to use that disclaimer every time. But it's way more characteristic of the left to choose not to respect the opinions of others versus the conservative mindset. Would you
I'd agree with that. I believe that everyone should have the right to express their opinion. By no means should all opinions be respected. I don't agree with that statement.
I like that. That's a good line.
No. So
can I use that, by the way?
Go ahead. I'll give you all sorts of one-liners.
And so
no, it's a good one. I think I've just seen, I was talking with somebody not too long ago, and we were talking about some of the attacks I've faced from progressives, etc., to the point where someone threatened my life, and I had to get a restraining order against them because they had gone off the rails. And they made an interesting point. They said, we don't hear about this with conservatives doing it to the left. And I said, no, you got to back off that. It does happen. There are threats that are made every time somebody comes out. There's crazies out there on both sides that do this.
Absolutely.
But I said, it's much more of a public lynching on one side than the other. But I've seen plenty of liberals get roasted by conservatives, right, wrong, or indifferent. And so I think a lot of that conflict that we talked about is happening out there. And I don't think it's healthy for any of us at this point. I agree with you. Let everybody just say what they've got to say. If you don't like it, well, then you move on to the next thing. You have a fundamental freedom in this country. I feel it's not in the Constitution, so I know you're going to hit me with that. It's okay if you're offended. It's okay if you're upset by what somebody says. There's nothing that protects you from being unoffended.
Yeah.
I don't disagree with that.
Yeah. And the at the end of the day, it's of course we could just brush off and brush off the labels and the semantics and can we all get along and this and that and I don't think anybody on this panel right now is the heart of the problem that we are discussing. But because politics works the way it does, then when you label yourself a certain way or you support a certain policy or a candidate, then you're now tied to that. And so that's where I think it becomes, not important, but helpful to have an agreed upon, at least within the confines of any given conversation, agreed upon terms and understanding what do we mean by war when we say war? Okay, well, let's say conflict, and then we all know what we're talking about with conflict. And to kind of clamp down on the actual issue that we were talking about, this idea of being able to express your ideas is one that seems like it should always be a foregone conclusion that if you have an opinion, it should be out there and so on, and that's the end of it. And that seems to be the mindset when it comes to the CRT stuff. And the personally with you, Anirudh, having spoken about it before, I feel that you have a inaccurate depiction of what it is that people have an issue with about the whole CRT thing. And just now that we have Blaine here, Blaine, I would if you I don't know how, again, I don't know how familiar you are with this issue, but I'd love to hear your thoughts.
You know, I struggle with the concept that race is the defining element of what a person is in our country, and I've never believed that. It's contrary to what I was raised with, and it's contrary to the values that I have. And I think it actually further divides our nation to use that as the cornerstone for marking, where people come from and what their perspectives are. And I think it does actually more harm to us as a nation than good, personally. But that's my opinion of it. Having looked at some of the 1619 materials, I was like, as a historian, I got to be honest with you. I wasn't pleased at all with what I saw, because it really pushed forward that division. And I think we've got plenty of divisions right now. We don't need anything else pushing that. Having said that, should race be taught? Should the civil rights movement be taught? Should slavery be talked about in schools? Absolutely.
As it has been for the last
As it has
90
been for years. And but is that the thing that defines who you are in this nation? I thought we moved past that, personally, and and I find it just to be a struggle.
And I'd like to throw it to you as well, Anirudh. But before I do, the reason I asked Blaine first was again because we have had this conversation, and we were talking. I think the crux of that part of the conversation was that you were under the impression that conservatives were arguing that critical race theory itself was being taught in schools, and that just wasn't the case. And so, all of this hullabaloo is over nothing. Notice Blaine didn't even utter CRT, critical race, or, well, he said race, but he didn't say theory, and he certainly didn't say any of those things. And so I invite you to respond directly to Blaine, but I also would I would like to see if what he has said and what we're saying now kind of sheds a little bit more light on the point that I was trying to make, that it's not about whether it's the CRT, whether it qualifies as CRT or it's not technically CRT. It's whatever it is that's being taught is what people have the problem with.
All right. So I guess we'll do it this way. Look, Blaine, I agree with you. In an ideal world, race would be a non-issue. We wouldn't even be talking about it, and it would be as superfluous as a person's eye color or hair color. Unfortunately, this is an issue that economist William Easterly has pointed out multiple times, which is oftentimes because we form ethnic communities, we create both incentive traps and incentive successes. One of the issues is that oftentimes the environment you grow up with is characterized by geospatial racism. Like, I think the first thing that most people go to when they talk about like systemic racism is talk about police. That's not a good example. The best examples would probably be in geospatial segregation. There are cases to this day where even though the legal laws that separated red line neighborhoods, those are no longer on the books, the inequality that is created in the housing values has resegregated individuals to where there are some cities right now that are more segregated than they were in the 70s. And oftentimes that is just done due to the unforeseen circumstances of not addressing racial disparities. We've had racial disparities, but if we are all running a race and then one group of people had their legs blown out from under them and only got healed 2 months in, they're already far behind. And those inequalities, if not addressed, are going to fester and create more unhappiness, more civil strife, and talking about race and understanding these were the injustices that happened then. This is our failure to respond to them, and these are ways that we can move towards fixing that. I think at least gives children the correct paradigm to understand, all right, the world that they're inheriting is not, it's not hunky-dory. There's some issues that they've inherited from their parents and they're going to have to fix. Like I don't know if you've would have talked about this, but one of the things that I learned, because I was in Texas, so a lot of the history curriculums that I learned up until I got to the AP level in high school, they were very much focused on giving like an idealistic understanding of our state, of our country. And only afterwards did we start talking about things like the Tuskegee experiments, where we started talking about the enforcement of the model minority myth in the United States. Different experiences that are more telling of my experience as an immigrant to this country, and not something you would necessarily see in a type of history that's very whitewashed and tries to paint like America as like a intrinsically one way or another. I think a lot of people had the issue with the 1619 Project because they made the claim that, I mean, they made some incorrect historical claims. I'll agree with you on that. But they also made the claim that America was inherently racist. And I think that that statement is not incorrect because, unfortunately, these two statements exist simultaneously, that America is a deeply racist country, but is also probably one of the least racist countries on the planet. And dealing with that is something that we're going to have to deal with and try to reconcile.
I don't disagree that there are race issues that have to be addressed. But I'm the only person on this call that was alive during the civil rights movement, albeit I was a young child at the time. You know, I actually.
Yeah, but you're white, so we don't want to hear from you. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, my opinion's just as valid as anyone else's. And having watched where we at, I think we are at a better state now in terms of race than up until I'd say the last year or so than we have ever been as a nation. And what I have been seeing personally, when you say there's systemic racism, that elicits you're essentially labeling everyone who's white as racist. And when you do that, that causes a real problem with people who don't see themselves as racist. And I know the arguments, well, just because you don't see yourself as racist doesn't mean that you're not racist. I'm sorry, I just don't subscribe to that. You're essentially, and I cringed when you said whitewash. But when to me, when you go through and say, well, racism is this huge, massive problem, I don't disagree, but I also don't agree that it's a problem that solely exists in the white community. And I feel like that's where that's being pushed a lot.
I'm
not saying you did, but I'm saying
I would say that in the United States, it'd probably be easy to say, like, of different populations, affluent white people would probably be the least racist population. I mean, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that that in terms of racial prejudice, certain ethnic groups and minority groups have more racial prejudice against each other. But that ultimately is not like, there are two types of racism. That's like the racism that we see as like an individual, like a person's racist to me, they called me a slur. That's something that we deal with socially. We shame people who are racist. That's not necessarily the issue when we're talking about systemic racism. Systemic racism is the issue of systems of power, or the way that we've organized our society, that create those blind spots for people who have different races. And that's not something we can address. So, for example, one of the major issues that we have is that our crumbling infrastructure is concentrated in poor areas, and those infrastructure had historical issues because, unfortunately, segregated and redlined areas did not receive infrastructure funding. So, which is why we have a concentration of all of our lead pipes and cracking infrastructure in areas that are majority minority. And so, because we know that, say, something like lead is responsible for developmental disorders in children, making it difficult for them to learn. It's an endocrine disruptor, harming their development. It causes them to become more violent and aggressive. Those would just contribute to the negative impacts that a person feels. And that has nothing to do with you or me being personally racist, but has to do with mistakes that our ancestors, mistakes that our predecessors made when crafting legislation that we ultimately have to pay the price for.
To me, it's always, and I'm not saying you're wrong by any stretch. Having lived in Detroit and I live outside Washington, D.C., and I've been into some neighborhoods that, are quite run down and are project filled. And I've seen what has happened to Detroit overall. But I would label a lot of that more economic than racially based, given that when you look at the preponderance of legislatures in the state of Michigan, they tend to be more liberal. And in the last 20 years, they also tend to be more people of color. So the concept that somehow this isn't happening because it's race, it's like, well, wait, a lot of these cities have been run by minorities for many, many years. And you're going, well, they need more money. Okay, I get that, but that's their role, is to secure that money. And you're making the argument that they're not getting it because of race. And that's where I'm struggling a little bit. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just saying that's where I have a visceral reaction to it. And that's where because I don't know if that's the case or not.
Real quick, Anirudh. Blaine, would it be accurate to say that you see Anirudh's point as an oversimplification? Is that accurate or no?
I don't know if it's that or if we're quibbling over what a definition is. And that's what I always kind of worry about when we start talking about words like systemic, because we can go down that. We've gone down that rabbit hole a couple times tonight.
Right. And I think if that's the case, then let's go down that rabbit hole. Let's have that conversation so that we can have a definitive understanding of what it is that we're talking about. But I was just trying to characterize, Anirudh. What were you going to say?
Yeah, so I think that I don't want to play too much into this like left-right dynamic, but unfortunately, the problem with systemic racism is that even Democrats with their own systems are also contributing to this racism. It's not like the Republicans are the only people who ever do bad, or conservatives are the only people who ever do bad, or white people are the only people who ever do bad. No, it's an issue that unfortunately a lot of people, even people who are victims of racism, are contributing to. So it's not like a simplification.
I would agree with that.
So I'll give you a great example. I think that Blaine, if I could give you like enough examples of these types of implicit biases, or not even just implicit biases, but like just decisions that we made as a society that make it very difficult to repair this. Do you think I could convince you this? Like, for example, in similar areas, tenants or homeowners who are Black have shown systemic under evaluation of their property. I think there was one study that showed that Black tenants on average had their homes evaluated, accounting for other factors like location, geography, square footage. They found that Black residents had, I believe, a 28% lower evaluation of their homes. Let me find the exact study. But there are examples where, or like, there's another example where.
Okay, real quick, before you move on from that, though, that scene, and I don't even disagree that is an example of what I would be comfortable calling systemic racism. However, when you look at the context of that, it is, if that were the whole story, then there would be a whole industry of white people who go to pretend that they live in homes to get them appraised and so on and so forth. This is a story that I heard about somebody, which I think you're referring to. If not, I'm sure it's happened many times. But a Black family had an appraisal on their house, and then they thought it was rather low, and they got a white family to come in and do exactly what I just said. And the white people's appraisal was in fact higher. So obviously that's anecdotal, and that's one example of a direct comparison, even though it was different appraisers, so it wasn't exactly 1-to-1, but it was, I think it was big enough. I don't remember the numbers. It was a big enough difference where it shouldn't be that big. However, the on a larger scale, because of the redlining and these issues that you're talking about, that did certainly exist. If you take the aggregate appraisal of square footage and all that stuff, it falls. It's much more on the neighborhood and the area than it is on the individual.
Right. So home prices are multivariate. So there are multiple factors that go into it. So whenever we run some sort of multivariate regression, we're going to account for that. So we're going to do ceteris paribus. We're going to hold square footage equal. We're going to do it within the same neighborhood. And the only factor that we're going to look at in differences is the racial breakdown of the family. And if we're only looking at the racial breakdown of the family, here are the numbers. I linked the Brookings study into the
I'll take
chat.
a look at that. I'm not going to do it live online.
Yeah, it's a long read. It's a very, very, very long read.
Okay. Well, if there's
But the math checks out. It's a very, very thorough analysis.
Okay, but they're citing this, and you're saying that makes it systemic.
So this is just an example of systemic, but this is like the broader systemic racism is the geospatial segregation.
So again, why don't you define what you mean by
geospatial?
Geospatial?
I'm kind of curious where you're coming from with that, just so that I
of course
frame of reference.
So this is a tendency of people. They often live in communities where they're right next to each other. So I'm in an area of North Texas where there are a lot of Asians, specifically South Asians, Indians in our area, and they tend to like live together. They have those same types of communications. That's just a tendency of people. So geospatial segregation is when groups of individuals end up inculcating into their own like seclusion zones or little boroughs, ethnic neighborhoods. Those is necessarily a consequence of individuals behaving that way. We get worried when there are certain privileges that come to certain areas because of which groups live there, and the inability for those groups to move around or to essentially move to different neighborhoods. So the movement across neighborhoods is also something that we worry about. If there's a barrier that inhibits the free movement of people within cities to better neighborhoods, and there are factors that preference the rights of some neighborhoods over others, we're going to be worried about that, and we're going to call that like a systemic, and if it's based on race, systemic racism, it's geospatial. Like, I'll give you a great example. If there needs to be like a dump built somewhere in a city, if there's a preponderance where one ethnic group's neighborhood is valued less because that's who they are, it's more likely for a city if they want to use eminent domain to buy that land off, they're going to move to the poorer neighborhood, and that's where the dump is there. So if there are toxic chemicals leaking from that dump, it's going to hit the people who already are probably the poorest and least well off and least able to advocate for their rights. So just like us engaging in a rational economic transaction, we're going to recreate those harms.
Well, I understand now where you're coming from, and I would say that there's a few flaws with even that scenario that you draw, because there's a lot of hypotheticals tied to that. You're assuming that that's the reason that the ground was chosen. You're assuming that there's a toxic leak. You're assuming all of these terrible things that get attributed to it that may not have been a factor at all, and it often the people that are making those decisions are the people who have been elected in those neighborhoods and those cities to make those calls. Now, I will tell you, there was a time in our country, my hometown, where I was raised in Battle Creek, Michigan, when they rerouted the Kalamazoo River and concreted it, they deliberately ran it through a poor Black neighborhood. But that was 1952. Now, if somebody were to try something like that, the media would be all over it. Everyone would be up in arms. And there would be support across the board going, okay, that's just wrong.
So we saw this issue with Flint, Michigan, where the pipes eroded, and when the river was rerouted, that ended up causing lead leakage into the water. It was a big media story. President Obama talked about it. Yep. To this day, Flint, Michigan doesn't have clean water. We talked about it. We never fixed it. So I think the outrage is one thing, but outrage is not necessarily sufficient to fix a problem.
Well,
so
I think if you check, Michigan allocated hundreds of millions of dollars to actually replace those pipes. It is an infrastructure issue. I completely am aware of it, and I'm familiar with Flint as well. And I can tell you, it's not a quick fix, because it's not just the lead running from the main lines to the houses. It's lead in some of those older houses having to be replaced. And we're talking, they've allocated, I don't know the amount. I'm sure you can find it online. They've allocated a lot of money to that. The fact that it's not an instantaneous change, I think that's, you got to understand, infrastructure isn't. We've seen this across the board with, you try to replace a bridge, it takes forever. I think most of Michigan's roads are under construction right now, it feels like. And that's part of it. But to label it as a race issue, I think is not fair when you look at the representation of who's running the Flint government. I just feel like, how could you sit there and say it was some other person that inflicted this? There were decisions that were made at the state level, and I know that's been litigated heavily, and there were bad decisions made. But to say that it was done because of race, I just don't subscribe to that.
So, could you believe that we can have actions that have racist consequences without ever having to intend those racist consequences?
Absolutely. There's always unintended, for everything that the government ever does. There's unintended consequences.
And I've been waiting for when we were first talking about this, and even the CRT stuff. One of the first things you said was, about racial disparity in general, and I think I'm not exactly sure how to say this, but it seems like there is, and I'm not specifically talking about you. I'm not even specifically talking about a political party, but just in general, in the general zeitgeist, or however you want to put it. There seems to be an axiomatic acceptance that racial disparity is a good metric of, is the country doing good or bad? Full stop. Do we have the if Black people are 16% of the population, do we have 16% of Black people who make over this much? And if so, then we're good, and if not, then America's terrible. That's not
an axiomatic belief. There are actually some important reasons for why we would use that as a metric. So, are you familiar with ANOVA regression?
No.
All right. So if we want to say there are two populations,
real quick, I want to make sure you understand. I'm saying that this is, I'm not saying it's a non-factor. I'm saying I think there is a tendency to overemphasize the degree to which racial disparity is a factor in any given issue.
All right. So I'll explain like a little bit of the mathematics. So generally speaking, like large populations, if there's something different about them, like for example, the average male in the Netherlands is taller than the average male in Indonesia, right? They're the same population of males, but in two different countries, there are two different heights. Now, what are the reasons for those differences in those populations? It's going to be nutrition, it's going to be genetics, there's going to be multiple different reasons for that. So when we say like, if we lived in a truly race-blind society, the median household income of African Americans would be no different than statistically different than the median income of like white Americans. Now, because there's a disparity, we now have to ask the question: what are the factors that are causing it? Is there some other factor that's tied to race? Is it like somehow like their melanin count affects how productive you are? Is there some alternative explanatory for why these populations are different? And we see consistently accounting for different variables like class, income, geography, and we see these consistent racial disparities, and we have to assume that these individuals' engagement with society or their method for building wealth has some sort of bias that causes these negative upwards and downward trends. Because
I don't disagree with you, but a correlation is not causation. And so
which is why we run multivariate regressions to figure out, is there a causal relationship?
I think sometimes it can be other factors that come into play and I went through this recently because we did a book on a serial killing spree in Washington, D.C., and I talked with a number of law enforcement officers from the 1970s who worked the cases there. And I said, being a pasty-faced white guy, I don't know anything about these neighborhoods that is tangible. So explain it to me. And they said, you got to remember, we're looking at 50% dropout rate in these communities from high school. Okay. So I look at that and go, so what is the cause of that? And they're like, it's multiple causes. It's in some cases, this is the third or fourth generation of students who, their parents didn't graduate, their grandparents didn't graduate. And so bailing on school is a value that's not promoted from within that community. Now, you might look at it and go, well, it's because the schools are racist and they're not given the same books and the better equipment and things along those lines. But as people who actually lived in that community, who were Black, I was interviewing, was going, a lot of this falls on us in our own community. We're not forcing that, or we're not driving that up. That could have a direct impact, for example, on somebody's capability to earn money. If you can't read, if you can't do basic math, etc., that can have a huge impact on it. Now, to say that that's racist because it's mostly impacting a particular community, the implication is someone's inflicting that racism.
Right.
And I don't subscribe to that necessarily. And I'm using that as a very vague example, but we've been throwing some out.
All right. So, no. What you're saying is definitely true. It's multivariable. And oftentimes, race is not even the biggest factor that determines a person's outcome.
That was my question.
So, but it is a significant outcome. It's not the
yeah.
greatest, but it is a significant one that we have to take into. For example, I think you would appreciate this. So, I'm pretty sure you've heard of the male-female gender wage gap, right?
Yeah.
You've heard of that, right? Women earn 79 cents for every dollar, 77 cents for every dollar that a man makes. Hold on. You're getting to the point about how it's been debunked a million times over the last decade or so. No.
Right?
So it'll be a bit more complicated than that.
Okay.
So now you have to look at all the factors. So one, men tend to work longer hours than women. Okay. That's a fact. So if we account for that, okay, hours worked. All right. So the disparities, I think, I don't remember the numbers. I remember reading the study a while ago. It's like about 83 cents per $1. Then if you account for industries or location, it starts closing down. And if you account for all relevant factors, it's around 96 cents for every dollar made. So there's still a 4-cent disparity. But there's actually something even more phenomenal about this, which is that disparity closes and women end up earning more than men if they are unmarried under the age of 30 and they don't have children. The moment a woman gets married, she suffers a negative wage cost. So married women are often discriminated against in the workplace and earn less, whereas husbands face a wage premium for getting married. So they're more likely to get promotions and more likely to see increases in raises. And this has been documented by econometrics.
That makes perfect sense.
I found that hilarious, but okay.
Yeah. So if we start accounting for that, actual sexism, which is discriminating against mothers, discriminating against married women, that would represent a very small answer to the wage gap, but would still be a significant explanation for millions of dollars collectively earned.
So let's go to the word that you use, which is discrimination against women, or that phrasing, because they went off and started a family, etc.
Just getting married.
Well, no, but I'm or whatever. What you're seeing is they should get the same pay, even if they've left the workforce for, let's say, 4 or 5 years, just to raise the kids enough to where they could do it. They should be receiving the same pay as someone who remained in the workforce, was active and productive in the company, and advanced themselves and the company's bottom line. They should be treated, they should get a boost up for that. And I would say that is sexism, because what you're doing is you're rewarding somebody, for something they actually didn't do.
No, that was never my claim. My claim was there is a wage premium and a marriage premium.
Right. But the part that you missed is he didn't say you were wrong. He said the way that you are phrasing it is and I mean,
So
I do
the
think
way
you're
that I
wrong.
phrase it
But
is that
but the point
your marital
the point
status
is
irrelevant to your wages.
it's not irrelevant to your wages. A man who's married has a bigger incentive to work harder, and a woman who's married is more likely to take that time off.
Lutch, so
That has nothing to do with the liking women or not liking women or preferring. It has to do with business and wanting reliable employees.
Lutch, listen. Okay, then explain this to me. For two people, both married, one is a woman, one is a man. They both work equal number of hours. They both are equally productive. They both provide the same amount of value. Do you believe that the man, because he's married, should be paid more than the woman because she's married?
No.
No, all things
Yeah.
being equal, no.
Exactly. So that's what the
All
analysis
things
found.
being equal, no.
But that right.
That no, the
All
But I
things
can
aren't
tell
equal.
you,
No.
having worked for 25 years at Ernst & Young, there were analysis after analysis done every 2 years within the firm to look at, are we doing any pay gap differences at all across the board? Anytime anyone was even remotely spotted where it was caught and somebody said, wait a minute, let's look at comparable degrees, comparable years here at the firm, comparable years of experience, comparable education. When they spotted those things, they were instantly addressed. That is happening across the nation right now. And it happens in many companies, and it's very invisible. It's not a public relations gimmick. They don't announce
Surprisingly.
it. They don't make a big deal about it, but it happens every day in these companies. And it's small business and large businesses are doing this. So
Some
I
businesses
I
might be
strongly
fixing it.
believe that this gap that exists is one of someone playing with the statistics on it more and parsing the data differently. It's kind of like when somebody told me, we had this huge discussion. I worked in STEM. I was a technologist. And
Mhm.
somebody said, we've got to get more women in STEM. And I said, at what point are we not hiring women in STEM? If we get them, we hire them. We don't care if they're male, female. We don't care about any of that. We're looking for certain skill sets. And if people have them, we hire them. And the argument is, well, we've got to get more women into STEM because they can make more money. Well, that's their choice to go into the
Right.
STEM field. There's no block that prevents women from going into the STEM field. I said, what's the inherent block? The businesses will hire them the minute they get the skills we're looking for. We'll hire them,
And
and
especially
we'll pay
if they
them
only have to,
exactly what we're paying the men.
or apparently if they're going to be paying them less, then why wouldn't every company be? I mean, I know this is a tired argument, but I haven't heard a good retort. Why is every company not completely staffed by females?
Well,
And
I will
cut that
say when
8%, that 8 cents or whatever on the dollar for every single employee every day, every year.
Wait,
Yeah,
so
I mean, I will say
that's
when
actually
I
the
went to
reason why there's
India,
a
I
preference
did
to
see
hire
that
women.
kind of split.
Sorry, you're talking over.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead.
No, so this is actually a trend in tech companies where there is a preference to hire women.
Okay.
So not necessarily because they accept less pay, is because on average they tend to be more productive than men. Granted, so long as they are under the age of 30.
So
not
why don't we
married,
need
and
more
single.
men in tech then than
Well,
we have right now?
Well, we need more men in college in general, so I guess that would field to
I mean,
more
that's a
men in
whole
tech.
other. That's a whole other. That's
No,
a whole
so-
other
oh,
conversation.
Yeah,
So
you
again,
know, I
just-
used to be in your camp. I really was, but you
So
know,
was I.
No, so-
I've pivoted heavily on college, and not everybody is destined to go down that path to be a success in life.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm confused by what you mean by that. As in, you don't believe that everyone is destined to be successful in college, or just successful in general?
I'm not saying that everyone is destined to go to, that it's a good thing for everyone to go, more people to go to college. I think that there are trades that they can be very productive in. I think this shoehorning of people into colleges is not healthy or productive.
and now with the cost now, everybody who's going to college for their bullshit degrees and then not able to get a job, and now everybody who didn't even get the experience of going to college or has already paid for their own college now is being asked to foot the bill. And so the push for college is definitely a multifaceted conversation. And education, of course, is a great thing, but but at what cost?
Well, we should, if we could, it might be good to wrap up at this point. I've got some other stuff
Yeah.
I have to hit.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point to wrap up. We definitely I would love to do this at least like once a month or so. We had a couple others who were supposed to join us and they weren't able to do so. But Anirudh and Blaine, I want to thank you for this. This has been a really cool conversation. And
Thank you. Now I've got to go read a Brookings Institute.
Oh, thank you for having us on. And if you ever need help, I'll send you more articles to read.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
And Blaine, before you go, anything you want to plug?
No, my stuff, people can Google me or go out on Amazon and look at my books, and there's nothing specific I'm pushing right now.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Anirudh, anything you'd like to plug?
I guess not necessarily just for me, but my coach, Ed McCon-Moraes, is competing for a Jiu-Jitsu World Championship. Please follow him and watch him defend his belt.
Cool.
Yeah,
I started jiu-jitsu right before the lockdown, and then I moved and haven't been able to get back.
I started this week.
Oh, really? Cool.
Oh, wow. I just recovered from fractured fingers, so I'm finally going back in.
I've just been learning basic boxing moves at this point, but my instructor is a black belt and he's moving me into it. So I'm incredibly sore everywhere right now.
As you should be.
Yes.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, guys. Well, thank you again so much. I think this was a great start to something. What it's going to turn into, hopefully we'll see it blossom. But for now, I'm more than happy with what we did here. And thank you guys again.
Thank you.
Take care.
Good night.
All right. Good night.
All right. So that was an interesting conversation. With Anirudh being more on the left and Blaine being more on the right, and me being more in the center, maybe kind of not even leaning towards the right, just leaning away from the left. Let's put it that way. I wasn't sure where, I had conversations individually with them. I did the IDRYB 06 is one of them, and I don't know. Both of them have episodes of the podcast, so we were able to talk about those things. If you haven't seen it, Anirudh and I went on for 4 hours in his podcast, or no, 2 hours or 3 hours in his podcast. And then in the last IDRYB live, we went for 4 hours, I think maybe even a little longer. So there is a lot here. There's a lot going on. There's a lot to talk about. There is, things to parse out. And I think the point about semantics and things being words being used differently, I think that's a really good point. I think that's a really prevalent issue when it comes to having these kinds of discussions, when you're doing it in good faith like this, and especially if you're in some Twitter beef or something, and you don't expect good faith. Certainly it's difficult, and so I think taking the time to say, okay, when you say systemic racism, what is it that you mean by systemic racism? Okay, when you say war, when you say that, and if we can parse these things out, then a lot of the talking past each other that happens in any kind of conversation like this, if we can tamper that down, I'm not looking to convince anyone of anything. It would be nice if I could convince somebody that what I think is right and is great. But like I anticipated, this was not clearly defined on partisan lines. There, understandably, when it comes to the issues themselves, we seem, Blaine and I seem to agree a little bit more, and Anirudh seems to think about things a little bit differently. There was supposed to be another left-leaning participant who wasn't able to make it. Shout out to Jared. Go check out his episode of IDRYB that just dropped last week, and a clip just dropped this morning. I'm sure you realized there was no podcast episode this week, and so we are running with Jared. He could not be here tonight. and Ryan Bedell, who is he's on the left, but he is also an atheist. And so with that crew, I thought we would be able to have quite an interesting conversation. And we were able to have one even without them. So I can't wait to see what we get when they do actually join. So let me know what you thought about this. This is supposed to be a starting point. This is supposed to be the first of many. I think this is going to be, again, something that we want to do at least once a month, maybe a little bit more often. Maybe not all of us every time, but an ongoing conversation. I think it's something that people don't do enough. They have conversations with a lot of people, but the ongoing conversation is where you have the ability to dig into the specific thoughts and take the time. And maybe we have a whole IDRYB live just about what do we mean by systemic racism, or what do we mean by discrimination. And definitely let me know in the comments below what you think we could talk about after seeing who we are and where we come from and how we interact. What kind of things should we be discussing? Which kinds of things should we be discussing? Yeah, I'm like I said, this is going to be a regular thing, so make sure you subscribe so that you know when we're going live. You can join the chat. We didn't have any chatters today, but that is going to change as we keep doing this. And as you know that this is going to be here, so will somebody else, and they will be here too. You guys can have your own discussion. You guys can come up on the panel if all of that stuff. Like I've been telling you, I'm expanding this channel. We're doing more and more and more. And this is just a piece of it. So again, thank you to Blaine and Anirudh. They are linked in the description below, along with their episodes, where you can see our conversations about that. Don't also forget about those support links. I would love a little bit of help getting this going. And if you don't want to do any of that, just make sure you follow me on Twitter and Instagram, IDRYB Lutch right there, and just sit at home and think about how awesome I am. That would be great, but monetary support would be cool too. Yeah, but thanks again, and I am out.